Buenos dias. Good morning. First, I'd like to begin by thanking our organizers and the hosts of this conference, the Government of Mexico, UNFPA, and all the various agencies and organizations involved in this event. I have to say, it was a great pleasure to wake up this morning, to look out my hotel room and see the sunlight coming over a broad mountain vista. What a change from my daily commute in Manhattan and honking taxis and a lack of sunlight. It felt like a breath of fresh air. Now maybe that's not the most appropriate idiom to use in Mexico City, but in any case, it's a great pleasure to be here and have that perspective. I think that sense of expansiveness and broader perspective is actually quite helpful and relevant for reflecting on the kinds of issues we're here to discuss. If I could name one issue that requires a sense of broader perspective and a sense of expansiveness, it is the challenge of global sustainability. I've been asked to speak with you today about the work of the Secretary General's new panel on global sustainability. But I must admit I come wearing two hats. I also work for the Secretary General's climate change support team, and therefore will address my comments, of course, to the issue of climate change and its overlay with the issue of global sustainability. Today, I'm here primarily to share with you some of the thinking behind the creation of this panel, what it hopes to achieve, how this relates to the climate agenda, and including some of the work on adaptation and population dynamics that all of you are engaged in. Let me begin with a very simple assertion, one that I'm sure is quite clear to most of you here. Very simply, in the next 40 years, the world will undergo enormous transformations, hitting new peaks in greenhouse gas emissions and population growth, while reaching potential limits in the availability of key resources and the health of our ecosystems. From peak water to peak oil to peak population, the planet that our children and grandchildren will inhabit could experience increased stress across a range of issues, not the least of which is climate change and its impacts. Despite what some may say, climate change is not going away. Not in the political arena, not in the carbon markets, not in the business environment. The prolonged droughts and heat waves, intensive flooding, and more powerful storms we saw in many countries this summer are consistent with some of the longer-term trends associated with climate change, as described by the IPCC. Indeed, what we call extremes or abnormalities today could well become the new normal tomorrow. As we move into the second decade of the 21st century, there remains a dangerous gap between what the science says is needed and the full range of actions needed to meet the climate threat. We need to go much further, much faster, if we are to meet the scientific bottom line for minimizing climate risk. Let us be very clear. Nature is not negotiating. Nature has already set its deadline. The longer we delay, the more we will pay in terms of resources and most significantly in terms of lives. We need to take action to reduce climate risks and strengthen resilience. And we must do so in a manner that anticipates future demographic and resource trends, including population dynamics, instead of merely reacting to them later. Adaptation that embraces this approach is an investment in the MDGs, an investment in sustainable development. It is a necessary and smart investment in our common future. Now, I'm sure the phrase, our common future, might ring a bell for many of you here. Of course, this was the title of the landmark report issued by the Brundtland Commission on Sustainable Development. More than a quarter century has passed since this report, and since that time, the rapid pace of climate change has injected fresh urgency into this discourse. The world today stands at a crossroads. We need to help lift people out of poverty and provide opportunities for a decent, dignified life. At the same time, we must also preserve the ecosystems and the stability of the climate that sustains us. Achieving these aims is a matter of crucial importance for all countries. In essence, this is why the Secretary General last year established his new global panel on sustainability. He has instructed his panel to, quote unquote, think big, be bold, and be practical. As he said, the time for narrow agendas, narrow interests, and narrow thinking is over. The challenges of the 21st century require nothing less. I'd like to underscore today that this is a development panel, a sustainable development panel. It will have a special focus on climate change, but it is not exclusively a climate change panel. Two presidents, the President of South Africa and the President of Finland, serve as co-chairs. 21 members are on the panel, and they include high-ranking government officials from both developed and developing nations, as well as representatives from the business community and from civil society. They have been asked to submit their final report by the end of 2011. This will be in time to provide inputs for key intergovernmental processes, such as the UN Conference on Sustainable Development, otherwise known as Rio 2012, and of course the annual COPs. To that end, the Secretary General has asked the panel to provide practical proposals on how countries can foster green growth and promote sustainable development in a carbon-constrained world. The panel has also been asked to address the institutional and financial arrangements that would be needed to put this new blueprint into practice. In so doing, the panel has been asked to connect the dots. If you think back to your childhood and remember the pictures you were told to draw and to connect the dots, that's exactly the framework in which we need to use in thinking about these issues of global sustainability. To connect the dots between energy, water, food security, climate change, ecosystems, biodiversity. The list goes on, and I'm sure many of you could add your own issues to that agenda as well. But what does this mean concretely? Let me give you one example, something the Secretary General has recently called the 50-50-50 challenge. Simply put, in the year 2050, there will be nearly 50% more people on the planet. Most of the population growth will occur in developing countries, where exposure to and vulnerability to climate impacts is often more acute. Each person will obviously require access to sufficient food, water, and energy. Many will aspire to the consumer comforts and the lifestyles that many of us in this room enjoy, a lifestyle that is fostered and powered by fossil fuels. Of course, this is a lifestyle that many would say is unsustainable for 6 billion people, let alone 9 billion people. Now back to that 50-50-50 rubric. In the same year, 2050, scientists have told us the world must reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 50% to avoid dangerous climate tipping points. So in that year, 2050, how will we provide a decent life to nearly 50% more people on the planet while reducing global emissions by 50%? How do we square that circle? This is the challenge of global sustainability. As many of you know, today is International Disaster Risk Reduction Day. This year, the focus is on building more resilient cities. Millions of people now live in megacities located on exposed coastlines or in flood-prone areas. If we fast forward a few years, those numbers will swell dramatically. The result could be a human house of cards with potentially catastrophic consequences. To ignore these risks is to play poker with our future. A better, more nuanced understanding of population dynamics is essential to reduce our vulnerability and strengthen our adaptation efforts. We need to anticipate the demographic trends that will shape our cities and communities tomorrow. Effective adaptation depends on it. That is why your guidance, your research, and your policy prescriptions are so important. Together, we must harness the intellectual capital available across a wide range of disciplines and begin to connect the dots. We need to connect these dots between population and adaptation, between people and the planet, between human systems and the broader ecosystems that sustain us. There is no time to waste and much to be done. As I mentioned earlier, nature is not negotiating. Your conference here is a timely component in this important work. On behalf of the Secretary General's Global Sustainability Panel, as well as his climate change support team, I thank you for your efforts and I look forward to your contributions.